Hi everybody, and welcome to my tour on the history of architecture of the City of London. Today what we're going to do is dive into the heart of the city and discover and explore the layers of history from Roman origins through the medieval period right up until the modern day funky high-tech architecture. I'm Chris, and I think there's two good reasons why I'm qualified to give this tour. Firstly, I'm an architect, and secondly, I share the same name as arguably the most famous ever London architect that ever lived, Christopher Wren, who, by the way, also preferred to be called Chris. Okay, I'm standing here alongside my old mate Emperor Trajan. And it was actually during his reign that the Roman Empire was at its largest. And of course it was the Romans that were the first gang of people to come here to London, around about AD 50. They actually came under the Emperor Claudius, and they went on eventually to build a wall around London to protect themselves. And this here behind me is one of the best bits of the remaining Roman wall. We're actually not far, just from the Tower of London over there. What's interesting about this wall is the first 4 metres of it are the Roman part, and you can tell that because there are layers of red clay creasing tiles in the wall. But around about 410 AD, when the Roman Empire crumbled, the Romans pretty much left Londinium, and the area stayed sort of more or less abandoned until during the 9th century, when the Anglo-Saxons moved in and went on to build up the wall. So what we have here are the top 6 metres of the wall are Anglo-Saxon or medieval, and the bottom 4 metres are Roman. Okay, we're standing outside All Hallows by the tower. This is a really interesting church that's steeped in history. In fact, if it could speak, it would tell a lot of stories. They say it's the oldest church here in the City of London, and although it was bombed out during the Second World War, the walls do date back to the 15th century. Inside the church, there's actually an Anglo-Saxon arch which dates back to the 7th century, and the whole building stands on top of an old Roman domestic building. But what's also interesting about this church is it's associated with a great character called Samuel Pepys, who lived in the 17th century. Pepys was an interesting character because he was a courtier, which means he was closely associated with the king. And he lived through lots of interesting events, such as the beheading of Charles I. And Samuel Pepys also wrote a diary, and he wrote about the Great Fire of London. Pepys lived just up there on that street called Seething Lane. And on the morning of the Great Fire of London, September 2nd, 1666, Pepys came down Seething Lane and climbed one of the high points here at the tower. And he wrote about the fire. He said there was a great arc of flame, and it made him weep to see it. And then the story goes on that Pepys rushed home, dug a hole in the garden to keep his valuables safe, including his Parmesan cheese. Samuel Pepys also had a neighbour who lived on Seething Lane, William Penn. And William Penn had a son called William Penn, who was baptised in this church and was the same William Penn that went on to found Pennsylvania. Okay, the City of London is packed full of interesting secret places, and this is one of my favourites. We're actually inside St Dunstan's in the East. St Dunstan's in the East is a medieval church that was destroyed during the Great Fire of London. It was then rebuilt by Christopher Wren after the Great Fire, and then destroyed in the Second World War. And what they've left here is a lovely little commemorative garden. If you look around, you can actually see the walls date back to the 17th century in the medieval style of architecture, with their pointed arches and plate tracery and all of that. Now we're going to take a walk heading west into the centre of the city. Okay, I'm standing in front of the monument to the Great Fire of London. It's actually the tallest stone column in the world. It's 202 feet tall, and on the top of it is a golden urn which actually symbolises the flames of the Great Fire of London. And if you were to pull the column in this direction towards us, the top of it would coincide with this point over here. This is the point where the Great Fire of London actually started on the 2nd of September 1666. It's the site of the King's baker, Thomas Fariner. And the story goes that the daughter of the baker, who was in charge of the ovens, didn't do a very good job of shutting them that night, and a spark got out. And after a very dry summer, with wooden houses all close together, the fire really started to take place and take hold. And it was actually our character, Samuel Pepys, that was concerned about the fire. And he went off to the Lord Mayor and said, you need to come and see this and do something about it. The Mayor came to the fire and said, this is nothing. A woman could piss this out. Well, not only was the Lord Mayor politically incorrect, he was also wrong, because the fire took hold and actually went on to burn down 4/5 of the city of London. The truth is, no one really knows how the Great Fire started. Was it an accident? Was it a punishment from God for gluttony and just general bad behaviour? Was it a plot from the Catholics against the Protestants? There was so much suffering as people lost their livelihood and lost their homes, but also people benefited from the Great Fire of London. For one, it gave an opportunity to rebuild the city of London, and of course none other than our Christopher Wren got hold of the commission to do that. He ended up rebuilding 50 churches and St Paul's Cathedral and much of the layout of the city of London, all thanks to the Great Fire. Okay, we're standing on Lovett Lane. This is a cool street because if you half close your eyes, you can really imagine what old medieval London was like. Narrow streets, timber houses all leaning across and almost touching each other. So when the Great Fire of London happened, the fire spread really easily from one side of the street to the other. It's also quite cool because you can see here on Lovett Lane how London was actually really built up on a hill. And you can imagine in a time before sanitation, there would have been rivers of waste, almost like rivers of poo, flowing all the way down here until the waste ended up in the River Thames. And this is a bad thing because people were drinking the water from the Thames, and of course this was one of the chief causes of cholera, which was killing so many people back then. Okay, we're standing here in Leadenhall Market. What I love about this place is the contrast between the pretty Victorian architecture of the market and then the high-tech architecture of the towers looming down behind over the market. Now you might be able to make out in the entrance to the market, either side of the gateway through there at high level, there are two dragons. The dragon is the symbol of the City of London, and they also say these dragons, by the way, had some influence in the Harry Potter novels. There's been a marketplace here through the medieval times, so right back until the 1400s. But what's also interesting is what we're standing on here. This is the site of the old Roman Forum. So this would have been the central part of Roman London, Londinium. There would have been a great big square, market square, with a basilica in the middle of it, and the whole square actually was huge, roughly about the same size as Trafalgar Square. We're going to walk through the market, and then we'll see the contrast between Leadenhall Market and the high-tech world that will greet us as we go through. Okay, what I wanted to point out here was the juxtaposition between the pretty Victorian architecture of the Leadenhall building and the high-tech world of the city, and in this case the Lloyds of London, sometimes known as the inside-out building. It's almost as if the architect has designed the building so the guts of the building have been spewed from the inside to the outside. We've got all the lift shafts and stairs and service ducts and so on deliberately put on the outside of the building. This is real high tech. It's actually designed by the architect Richard Rogers, who's the same architect that designed the Pompidou Centre in Paris. I remember when I was a student of architecture, we were given the task of making models of famous buildings, and one of my co-students was given the task of having to make a model of this building, and he disappeared into his room with pipe cleaners and loo roll holders and all of that type thing, never to be seen again for about 3 days trying to make this. We're going to take a walk around the corner and see more juxtaposition between high-tech architecture and old buildings. we're standing here in high-tech City of London. What we've actually got is almost a rivalry between two competing top architects. On the one hand, we have the architecture of Norman Foster, and that includes the Gherkin behind us and the Willis building just over there. And then on the other hand, we've got the architecture of Richard Rogers, the Lloyd's building behind us, which we've already seen, and then the Leadenhall building behind me, which is also known as the Cheesgrater. It's curious actually because these two architects met each other when they were on scholarships as students at Yale University, and they came back to London and formed their own little practice known as Team 4, where I think they also work with their girlfriends, and there's some odd story about the fact that the drawing board would double up as the bed or something, which sounds quite awkward to me. But another thing I really like about this spot is the contrast, the juxtaposition between the little church behind us, which is St Andrew's Undershaft, which dates back to the 1500s and survived the Great Fire of London, and the Gherkin behind it. The contrast between the new of the high-tech architecture and the old of the medieval church there. We're going to take a walk west now and head into the heart of the city. Okay, we're standing in front of one of my favourite churches, St Mary Woolnorth, and believe it or not, it wasn't designed by Christopher Wren. Actually, it was designed by Nicholas Hawksmoor. Hawksmoor was a pupil of Wren, but ultimately became a famous architect in his own right. He was a particular Baroque architecture, and if you look at the church, it's got a very imposing three-dimensional quality about it. On the ground floor, we've got these rusticated separations between the stonework, and it includes the columns either side. And then if you look at the top part, you can see there's almost like two towers that merge together. They say that Hawksmoor was a bit of a macabre kind of architect, and there's some theory that he made sacrifices of small children underneath his churches. There's also another bizarre theory that surrounds Hawksmoor. He designed 6 churches here in the City of London, and they say that if you join lines together between those churches, where the lines cross, for some reason coincides with the murders of Jack the Ripper. Okay, this is a good spot for appreciating the layers of history in the City of London. You can probably make out behind me the little sign over there on the side of the church that actually says Walbrook. Well, what these people probably don't realise that are walking up and down the street behind me is they're walking on top of the River Walbrook, which is an ancient river and one of the key reasons the Romans came here in the first place, to develop either side of the river. It's still flowing today, it's just underground. The church itself was designed by none other than Christopher Wren, and if you can see behind me, there's also a kind of green copper dome. They say that that dome was a prototype for the dome of St Paul's Cathedral. The green modern building behind the church is the Rothschilds Bank headquarters, and that was actually designed to take into account the tower of St Stephen's Walbrook. If we go round this direction, you can see behind me a cool building which is the Bloomberg headquarters, designed by Norman Foster. Norman Foster also designed the black building over there on the other side, and you get this really nice contrast between the Walbrook building and Wren's church. Okay, we're standing here in Guildhall Plaza, one of the most interesting parts of the city. You can see behind me we have the Guildhall, which is actually a building that dates back to the 1400s. It's the actually oldest non-religious building to survive the Great Fire of London. Guild, by the way, is an old English word meaning tax, and it's a place where they control not only taxes but also the standards of people that worked here in the city, all the guilds and the products that were made, such as leather workers, metal workers, silk weavers and that kind of thing. But what's really interesting about this place is what we're standing on. If you look in the paving, you can just make out possibly an arc shape, a circular shape going round the Guildhall Plaza, because what we're actually standing on is the Roman Amphitheatre. They knew there must have been an amphitheatre somewhere here in Londinium in Roman times, because London was a big enough town to warrant one, but they didn't know where it was, and it wasn't until 1988, where they built the Guildhall Art Gallery, that they actually discovered the amphitheatre. It must have been an amazing find, and we're going to go down and take a look at it. Okay, we've come down into the amphitheatre. We're actually in the eastern entrance into the amphitheatre. Now, we're all experts in being able to identify Roman walls, and if we look over here, we can see the original Roman stonework of the amphitheatre, and within it are these layers of creasing tiles, these layers of red clay tiles. As we go through the amphitheatre, another feature that we've got down here is the old drainage system, the actual old timbers that have been preserved in the old London clay that run through the entrance area right up into the centre of the amphitheatre. Before we get to the amphitheatre, we've got an enclosure here just to the side of the entrance, and this would have been where the gladiators and animals would have been waiting before they went actually into the amphitheatre and started their combat. Let's go into the heart of the amphitheatre. So there were in fact two amphitheatres, the first one made out of wood and the second one made out of stone. And the Romans used the amphitheatre right up until the middle of the 4th century, when they stopped using it, when they converted to Christianity, because Christianity didn't go hand in hand with cutting people's limbs off and stabbing people in the throat and all of that kind of thing. And I don't know if you know this, but an interesting fact is that the word arena, or arena, is Latin for sand, and sand is what they used to mop up the blood of the victims that had died here in the amphitheatre. Okay, we're standing here on top of number 1 New Change, a building designed by the trendy architect Jean Nouveau, and it seems a good place to end the tour. Behind us, we've got the funky high-tech buildings of the Walkie-Talkie and the Shard, but there's one building, ladies and gentlemen, that I really want to finish on, and if I just turn us round, here it is. Of course, it's the masterpiece by Christopher Wren, St Paul's Cathedral. It's hard to believe, actually, that the previous cathedral that stood here, that was damaged beyond repair by the Great Fire of London, was taller than the version that we've got here behind us. That version was over 500 feet tall, whereas Wren's is 365 feet tall, which, ladies and gentlemen, is a foot for every day of the year. And thank you very much for your company, and I look forward to taking you on the next tour when we're going to look at the architecture of Westminster. Finally, if you have enjoyed the tour, please feel free to leave a comment, or better still, hit the subscribe button below.